We don't need to sell this one too much. You all know why you're here. Of course, the criteria in any GOAT conversation is always going to be a mess, and this one is no different. But after shuffling and rearranging things for what seemed like hours, I'm glad to present you my own personal top 20 greatest mixed martial arts fighters of all time. And look, as much as I would like to do honorable mentions, we would need a video that would just be too long to produce. So if you don't see your guy listed, just make the assumption that they came in at number 21. Number 20, Dan Henderson. As tried and tested as they come, Dan Henderson did not get his hand raised every time he competed. But in terms of his resume, this iron-chinned, rock-fisted monster spent 2 decades fighting in this sport. He was the first 2-weight world champion in Pride, and he literally fought everyone. His standout victories include Big Nog, Renzo Gracie, Fedor Emelianenko at heavyweight, Shogun Rua, Vitor Belfort, Michael Bisping, Vanderlei Silva, Rich Franklin, and a host of other icons of his era. Hendo kicks off our list with one shockingly deep career. Number 19, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira. Hitting a peak that is sustained for any meaningful period of time means a lot to me as a fan. And when Big Nog was the king of the Pride heavyweight division, he was the man. That's what made Fedor Emelianenko's eventual dethroning of him so special. Nogueira was as legitimate a heavyweight force as we had ever seen up until that point. Through this video, you will of course notice that I'm giving major points for longevity, but Nogueira's post-2008 drop-off isn't enough to detract from the first decade of his career. His work between the year 2000 and 2004 in particular is enough to warrant his inclusion here, a bona fide legend of the heavyweight division. Number 18, Israel Adesanya. This one may stir up some controversy, but in reality I don't think it should. Sure, Israel Adesanya's career is not yet over, and if he can't reclaim his belt, then we could be having a very different discussion. But there's an argument to be made that Izzy is the single best striker in UFC history from a technical standpoint, and he did manage to defend his title 5 times. That all counts for something. Adesanya is a sensational fighter, even if the fights themselves weren't always as thrilling as some of you would like. I don't mind that in a fighter though. The dude just knows how to win, and for the most part he's been quite successful in that regard. Number 17, Kamaru Usman. A fighter in a similar situation to the Adesanya pick comes in next. Kamaru Usman did lose his belt, sure, but the man had 5 title defenses and beat Colby Covington twice, Jorge Masvidal twice, Demian Maia, Gilbert Burns, Rafael dos Anjos, Tyron Woodley, and more. He is as imposing a physical force pound for pound as we have in the sport today, and again, like Izzy, indeed a lot will hang on his next fight, but Kamaru is already in that upper echelon of great champions of his era, based on his numbers alone. Also, his story isn't finished yet, so let's just wait and see what the future holds for the Nigerian Nightmare. Number 16, Matt Hughes. Speaking of great welterweights, for as much as he sounds like a pretty reprehensible person, Matt Hughes was the man at 170 pounds for years, and his best moments are truly outstanding. With 7 title defenses across 2 different reigns, Matt Hughes' physicality and his uncoachable drive to win made for some of the most iconic fights in UFC history. His victories over Carlos Newton, Frank Trigg, Georges St-Pierre, these are legendary fighting moments, and honestly, the more I think about how good Matt Hughes was, through his combined 7 title defenses, the more I consider moving him further up the list. But anyways, I'll just move on. Number 15, Chuck Liddell. Forget about the fall from grace, the dark years, and the return to MMA in 2018 to fight Tito. When you're talking about Chuck Liddell, that's not the point. I'm talking about the Chuck Liddell who blasted his way through the UFC light heavyweight division. The guy whose accurate and totally lethal punching style helped him finish several future Hall of Famers. He was a major crossover success, and in many ways, the face of the company at a time when they really needed one. The Iceman was a next level knockout threat during the golden era of the UFC, a vicious combination puncher who could knock people out moving backwards, which at the time was pretty cool. An absolute killer in his prime. Number 14, Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz is a major what-if within the sport of mixed martial arts, but even still he has managed to make himself one of the greatest fighters it's ever produced. As perhaps the most injury-prone fighter in history, which is probably a consequence of his unique style of movement, Cruz still managed to recapture his belt, entering a new generation against a legitimately great fighter in TJ Dillashaw and proving his quality, proving his timelessness. And before his horrendous spell of inactivity due to injury, the Dominator was living up to his name with a stunning run of form. I love a good innovator within this sport, and style for style, there's not a man on this list who has a stranger, more unique approach to fighting than this 135-pound legend. Number 13, BJ Penn. The decline of BJ Penn really does muddy the waters somewhat. I'd argue that no fighter in UFC history has gone from hero to zero, quite like the Prodigy, but again, like many other fighters here, sure, having longevity is just about as great a thing as you can have, but it's also not the only thing. and when BJ was tuned in and primed, he was as good as any fighter to ever do it. He won belts in multiple weight classes, showed an insanely well-rounded game with immense Brazilian jiu-jitsu chops, coupled with some of the best boxing in the sport. He fought guys far bigger than him and was generally competitive up until, well, he hit his infamous slide, and that certainly does keep him out of the top 10, but 13th place is not too bad. Number 12, Alexander Volkanovski. Look, it's my video, and if I want to put in one majorly biased vote, this will be it. I think Alexander Volkanovski is showing himself to be one of the all-time greats. He just hasn't yet fully carved out the resume to warrant putting him any higher, but to me, what I see when I watch this guy fight is a masterful athlete who is pushing the boundaries within the striking arts, and some might argue, the overall MMA game. He was the first man to truly stand up to the wrestling of a prime Islam Makhachev, and though I did narrowly score the fight for Makhachev, Volkanovski won the moral victory, and his 3 wins over Max Holloway are going to age quite well. So yeah, in my opinion, Volkanovski is just a few wins away from really making a climb up this list. Number 11, Amanda Nunes. Amanda Nunes just misses out in the top 10, but at this stage, there's no denying that she is one of the all-time greats. It can be difficult to compare the men's and women's side of the sport, but Nunes has just been so undeniable for years that she makes it pretty high up on my list. She didn't just beat the greatest fighters of her generation, no, she finished a lot of them, and many of them fell in the first round. And on the back of beating Chris Cyborg, Ronda Rousey, and Valentina Shevchenko alone, she'd be worthy of a spot on this list, but the rest of her wins just adds to it. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to leave us a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss an upload. We're also going to be pushing out exclusive content through Patreon and our YouTube membership system every month, so if you do want to avail of that, be sure to sign up using the links in the description. More information to follow. Number 10, Stipe Miocic. Heavyweight legend Stipe Miocic cracks the top 10 on the back of his insane run of form in recent years. Sure, he beat a few guys who were past their prime, but a lot of his wins have actually aged quite well. Beating Daniel Cormier twice is an outstanding achievement, and that first victory over Francis Ngannou was a statement and a half. He also knocked out several former champions in pretty quick fashion, showing accurate and deadly boxing for the heavyweight division. And apart from his early loss to Stefan Struve, Miocic holds at least one victory over the other 3 guys who managed to beat him: DC, Ngannou, and JDS. He's the divisional GOAT within the UFC for a reason, folks. Number 9, Randy Couture. Look, I do enjoy a glossy, clean record as much as the next guy, but for me, the ups and downs of a career, the people you beat, what you were able to overcome, that can be just as important. Randy Couture debuted in MMA at the age of 34 and went on to compete in 15 title fights, which I think is a record, winning UFC championship belts on 5 different occasions across 2 different divisions. This man was a fighter through and through. He started his career in the UFC and ended his career in the UFC, proving his mettle as a light heavyweight and a heavyweight, retiring at the grand old age of 47. Randy Couture was and is the man. Number 8, Daniel Cormier. I'm a huge Daniel Cormier fan, and I really do think that he was unfortunate to come up during the same era as the consensus greatest UFC light heavyweight and heavyweight fighters of all time. But here's the thing, DC only lost to John Jones and Stipe Miocic, 2 fighters who are making the top 10 here. Apart from that, his resume is pretty insane, and he did it across 2 weight classes, evolving into one incredibly crafty striker and all-round technician, bolstered by his Olympic-level wrestling, a supremely physical force in both divisions, and yeah, a personal favorite career for me. Number 7, Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo was a man who was unfairly cast to one side when he eventually did lose his featherweight belt in shocking fashion. But after he managed to turn his fortunes around at featherweight and later rebuild himself as a bantamweight, I think the MMA world started to give him his dues, or at least the newer fan base. This guy was already one of the all-time greats by the time Conor McGregor beat him, and in terms of his ability to evolve his game, to continue to be relevant, to continue growing far past his so-called prime years, Jose Aldo was a true sensation and still the featherweight GOAT in my eyes, at least for now. Number 6, Khabib Nurmagomedov. The Khabib era of the lightweight division was an insane time, and this guy brought us some of the highest peaks of mixed martial arts we have ever seen. He was a force so dominant that there was almost a sense of inevitability about his wins, a truly unstoppable fighter. Unfortunately, he didn't compete for long enough to warrant a place in my top 5, but I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that he could have challenged for the number 1 spot if he had. A fighter who truly did change the game, and another personal favorite career of mine. Number 5, Fedor Emelianenko. People sometimes like to disregard what Fedor Emelianenko did due to some of the more comical matchups he had, but across his decade-long unbeaten streak, there were more than enough top-tier A1 victories against world-class fighters to make his top 5 spot pretty concrete in my mind. I also think it's important to factor in the danger levels of the heavyweight division. You can't have an off night or even an off moment with a 250-pound monster standing in front of you. And for 10 years, Fedor just won and won and won, beating a host of world champions in the process. To this day, I don't fully understand how he didn't get knocked out several times during that run. A force of nature within this sport, and a true top 5 all-time great in my opinion. Number 4, Demetrius Johnson. The technical mastery of Demetrius Johnson is still baffling to me. People are only now realizing that the flyweight division is one of the most electric and exciting in the sport, but under the 11-fight reign of Mighty Mouse, he was well and truly suffocating the weight class's talent. There's an argument to be made that DJ showed us perhaps the highest levels of MMA we've ever seen, and even now in one championship, he is proving himself against bigger opposition in their bantamweight division, a trailblazer for mixed martial arts that was unfairly underappreciated during his time in the UFC. Number 3, Anderson Silva. No fighter in mixed martial arts history has tapped into the well of fighting magic more than Anderson Silva. He is responsible for some of the most iconic images the sport has ever known, and he just so happened to have also been one of its most dominant and long-running champions. The Spider was able to sustain his magic far longer than he had any right to, an eagle-eyed finisher who just knew how to win. But he also never compromised on fighting the way he wanted to fight, whether that was coming out with something truly spectacular or something a bit strange. In the end, it did cost him against Chris Weidman, but honestly, who cares? Anderson Silva was just so much fun. Number 2, Georges St-Pierre. If you asked me who my GOAT was a few weeks ago, depending on my mood, you might get Georges St-Pierre as an answer. GSP was just better than everyone. He beat those who came before him, made his superiority clear over his contemporaries, and then started to take out the rising generation before eventually retiring. His return 3.5 years later to win the 185-pound title also gets him bonus points. But just in terms of fighting skill, St-Pierre was one of the most complete martial artists we've ever seen. A total natural. Number 1, Jon Jones. And finally we come to the number 1 spot. And yeah, I don't think there's a shred of recency bias about it. Jon Jones was always either number 1 or number 2 on my list. As I said before, a toss-up with Georges St-Pierre. But now that he has managed to add heavyweight gold to his resume, I think the debate is pretty much over in my mind. Massive win streaks, more UFC title fight wins than anyone, 2 weight class belts, and the only nitpicking outside of the obvious USADA stuff comes down to narrow decisions that could have gone either way. He's the best to ever do it in my opinion, and for me, the case kinda closed after UFC 285. Anyway, that'll just about do it for this video. I'm certain that a lot of you disagreed with our picks given the subject matter, so hey, let us know what you think in the comments section below. Who are your own personal top 20 or top 10, even top 5 picks for GOAT honors? And if you enjoyed this video, let us know by leaving a like and hitting the subscribe button. And remember, exclusive monthly content will be available through Patreon and our YouTube membership, the links to which can be found below. As always, thank you for watching.